Good evening and welcome to For the Record. In just over a month's time, Fiji will have its new budget, the 2017 budget, announced by the Finance Minister. Yesterday, the entire day was dedicated to discussions at a pre-budget forum organized by the Finance Ministry, attended by members of the private sector, business community, civil society organizations, as well as officials from various government agencies. Now, the idea behind that was to brainstorm on what should be in the budget, what could be in the budget, what our hopes and dreams and aspirations, as well as our needs are. Based on that, in November, the Finance Ministry will be making a number of announcements for next year, and to talk about how we fared over the last 12 months or so since the last budget announcement. We have with us tonight the Finance Minister, Mr. Ayasayed Kayum, who will be talking with us over the next 40 minutes about how Fiji is doing economically, financially, and looking ahead possibly to 2017. Mr. Sayed Kayum, thank you very much for being here. Now, we've heard time and again that Fiji right now is experiencing an economic boom that's unprecedented. It's never been seen, and the effects can be seen on the ground itself. The most visible sign, of course, people have more disposable income. There's liquidity in the market. But what did it take to get to this stage over the last few years? Because the way we were previously, the economy wasn't moving, Fiji wasn't moving.
I think, thank you, Edwin. The point is that government, through the Baini Marama government, had put in place a number of policies that were based for the long term. And I think the growth rates that we have been experiencing over the past couple of years, and indeed is now for the figures released for last year, 5.3%, is unprecedented. The last time that we had such a sustained period of growth over a period of time in excess of 4%, was back in the 1970s, straight after independence. We've only had, this is only the seventh time where we've had, in excess of 5% growth. So, but the point is, like you point out, is that, what has been done, it has been a concerted effort to maintain consistency in policies. It has been a concerted effort to liberalize the economy, whilst at the same time ensuring that we look after those people who are the bottom end of the socio-economic scale. For example, we've made a lot of the rules, the taxation rules, friendly not just to businesses, to encourage them to invest, to build more factories, to get up new lines in the factories, but also to be consistent in our policies, not chop and change, sort of increase tariffs one year, decrease it the other year, or, increase tax or reduce it. Businesses actually need consistency in policies. At the same time, as we know, that government had also increased the income tax threshold. So only a few years ago, if you earned more than $8,400, or $8,600, sorry, you had to pay tax. And the rate at which you started paying tax was at 15%. We changed it about 2-3 years ago, where we increased the income tax threshold from 8,600 to 16,000. So if you earned 11,000, 12, 14, 15, right up to $16,000, you did not pay any taxes. So everything you earned, you took it home in your pocket. So therefore, people had more money to spend. Now, when people have more money to spend, that means if they do spend it, then it churns the economy. So, for example, I remember 2-3 years ago, it's going down after the tax cuts, going to Chicken Express. And one of the managers in one of the stores in Lautoka said to me, "Oh, boss," he said, "my chicken finishes by 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I don't know where these people are getting the money from." It's obviously from the tax cuts. So when people have a bit more money, extra $20, $30, some people had extra few $1,000s. Some people buy Chicken Express, some people may buy beer, some people may paint the house, some people may put money aside for a second-hand car. Whatever it is, some people may go and get more Sulu chambers made, buy more shoes. That's what you call consumption-led growth. People have more money, they consume more, so it puts pressure on, for example, if the shop has more people coming through, he will, or the shopkeeper or she will, employ more people, more sales staff. If you have more demand for Chicken Express, they'll say to the farmer, "We need, to Rooster Poultry or whoever it is, the chicken supplier Crest, we need more chickens." So they'll tell the farmers, "Hey, we need more chickens." So that's how the economy churns. That's what you call consumption-led growth. But what we have seen in the past couple of years is where we're seeing investment-led growth. Investment-led growth is where the private sector or individuals are actually investing in building assets. So people are building, borrowing money to build a new factory, borrowing money to buy a new hotel, borrowing money or investing money to build a new house or a new block of apartments. Now, investment-led growth is a good thing also, because what it does, it builds assets. It also creates jobs, because if there at the moment, for example, we have a bit of a boom in the construction industry, you see a lot of construction going on, whether it's somebody building a new fence or small bedroom, or building an entirely new house or apartments or hotels, whatever the case may be, or the airport being upgraded, or road construction, new bridges being built. It means it also creates jobs, because you need somebody to dig the foundation, you need somebody to lay the steel, you need to buy the steel, so people pay VAT on that. You need a plumber, you need a tile layer, you need a person who can put your roof, a painter. All of this creates jobs. So you have consumption-led growth is when the people talk about it, is what I mentioned initially, where people buy, when they buy, they spend, and that's consumption-led growth. This is investment-led growth too. Obviously, it's great to have both of them going on at the same time. So the policies have actually created that environment. So with that environment being created, there's a lot of confidence that's been built into the system, into the economy. And of course, after the elections, a lot of people say, well, okay, a lot of matters are now settled. I know Fiji is a good place. More foreign investors are coming in, a lot more interest is being shown in Fiji. So all of those things combined has created that environment for the economic growth that we are having.
There are people saying that the growth we are seeing is not sustainable. It's short term. A lot of it is driven out of the investment that the government is undertaking in capital investments, in roads and what have you. And those are all short-term investments, and after that, this growth will see a slump.
In fact, on the contrary, we've had sort of unprecedented levels of investment as a percentage of our GDP, in excess of 25% now. The latest figure shows last year that out of the 25%, 19% was in fact done by the private sector. The investment was done by the private sector.
So it's not the government.
So it's not the government. Of course, initially it was the government, but as a percentage of the overall spend now for investment purposes, it's 19% is now by the private sector. So in other words, if you say 19%, it's nearly 3/4 or 2/3 of the investment spend is now by the private sector.
All right, and on that note, we have to take a break. We'll be back shortly. Mulunaka, and welcome back to the show. Our guest tonight is the Finance Minister, Mr. A.S. Syed Qayyum. We're talking about Fiji's economy, and I'd like to get into the topic of Fiji's debt, international bonds. Just recently, you have made an announcement that Fiji has managed to secure more favorable bonds, foreign bonds from the US. Now, there was a bit of confusion surrounding this. Of course, now that's been cleared in Parliament. There was a closed Parliament session, so it raised a lot of curiousness. And there were also rumors going around about what actually happened in Parliament behind closed doors. But what I would like to find out from you is what exactly has happened with the $250 million US bond, what the situation was previously and what it is now.
Sure. Before I answer that, I just want to finish off something that we discussed in the last break.
Yep.
RBF recently has done a survey on the level of business confidence, and they found that business confidence was at an all-time high at almost 75% of large businesses planning to invest in plant and machinery in the next 12 months, and around 71% investing in building. So when you invest in plant and machinery, it means more production, it means more people need to be hired to run those plants and machinery. I think that's a point to make. I think it's very important. Now, getting to the bond, you see, it's very interesting. Fiji is a lot of people really thrive in rumor mongering and rumors, etc. The only reason, as we stated in Parliament last week on Wednesday, the only reason we had asked Parliament to have a closed session was so that when we get parliamentary approval for the raising of the bonds, we don't actually talk about the public does not know. I don't mean the public in Fiji per se. I'm talking more about the public outside Fiji where we're going to raise the bonds.
The market.
The market. That's what we refer to generally, the market. So because you see, if they know beforehand, there were two things we were doing. You see, our bonds were actually maturing in March next year. We wanted to go into the market early and buy back the existing bonds. The existing bonds are at the rate of 9%. Now, we believed, and the indicators were, that if we are able to issue bonds now, we would get a cheaper interest rate, or what you call a coupon rate, a cheaper interest rate. So why should we continue to pay 9% until March next year? Let's buy it back now, pay them out, and then issue them with new bonds and any other new investors we want to have or that want to participate in that at a cheaper interest rate. So we save money. But if you tell the market beforehand we intend to do this, they'll go, oh, these guys are planning to do this. Let's not sell them our bonds. Because we're getting 9%, why should we get a cheaper rate? That was number one reason. Number two reason is that we wanted to reduce the size of the bond. As you know, the bond we had was $250 million. We actually went to Parliament and said we only want to raise $200 million because we want to pay $50 million off. We actually have a savings account we've kept over the past few years, what we call the sinking fund,
yes.
The sinking fund, in which we had about $83 million US. So we had decided that we'll take $50 million out of that, pay $50 million off the 250, so we only raise bonds worth $200 million. Now, when you're in the market and you tell them beforehand how much you're going to raise, again, it affects your pricing. So that's the only reason we went in. So we had sought the Honourable Speaker's approval, and she could see the wisdom in what we were doing, and thanks to her that we were able to have that closed session. Now, because of the closed session, we were able to get very good pricing. Let me tell you the interest rates which I have got here. SDL government went to the market in 2006 and raised bonds worth $150 million US, and they got a coupon rate of 6.875%. This time around, when we raised the bonds, we got a rate of 6.625%, the cheapest ever we've received. So obviously, it paid off. Now, it was very interesting when we actually went out to the market, and we're getting, you meet with individual investors. Now, these people represent pension funds like equivalent of FNPF and various other investor organizations. They all said to us, why don't you raise US $500 million? Because that's the industry benchmark. Mm-hmm. And when you reach the industry benchmark, you get very, very good interest rates. We said, no, we have a plan. So and the plan is that we don't want to raise anything more than $200 million. But it was very interesting to get that feedback. And we just got news about 2-3 weeks ago that another country, and I think it was Pakistan, that raised a lot more money than us, but the interest rate they got was at 8%, if not more than 8%. So we got very good interest rates. So that was the reason behind it. In fact, when we had asked for the Parliament to be closed, we had said that the Hansard must record it, whatever was discussed, and as soon as we get the bond issued, you can release the Hansard recordings. And that's what we asked for on Wednesday. When we had the bond issued, we told Parliament exactly what happened, and then the Hansard records are available for everybody to know what actually was discussed on the day. Now, one interesting point actually I must tell you. In 2006, when the SDL government went and raised the US $150 million, they did not get parliamentary approval. Under the Financial Management Act, they were supposed to get parliamentary approval. They did not. They simply went, they issued the bonds, then they came back and told Parliament, we've done this. We actually sought parliamentary approval first, and then we went out to the market, because that's a requirement under the law, and that's what we did. Now, it was unfortunate, I have to say, that many of the members of the opposition tried to, given the fact, even though we said it was for good purposes for Fiji's benefit, they still tried to reveal the proceedings of that. And I understand some of the blogs carried, the recordings of the proceedings, etc. It was very unfortunate, but thankfully that, it did not hit the mainstream media organizations.
So just before we end this segment, you mentioned that the funds or the companies and whatever entities that the government met with were offering up to $500 million to Fiji. They wouldn't have done that if they didn't actually believe that Fiji was in a good place and would have been able to pay back that money.
Precisely the point. They said that we had a very good story to tell. They said Fiji had a very good story to tell. And that's why it showed that level of confidence. And indeed, we had a number of new players now who've invested in the bond. That again shows that there is a huge level of confidence in Fiji, the growth perspectives of Fiji, the prospects of Fiji. So, like I said, it was quite overwhelming for us. In fact, many of the investor meetings we had, they said, "Look, we know what the story is. It's a great story. How much do you want? What's the bond issue you're looking at?" And then a lot of them said to us, "Why aren't you taking US? Get the benchmark done." In fact, it was very interesting. We had before we went into the market, there was 2 Chinese companies. State-owned enterprises also go out and issue bonds. They had raised 1.5, and one had raised about $2 billion in the market. But that was a very positive feedback we got. But also, Edwin, what it does now also, with paying the $50 million, we have reduced also our debt to GDP ratio. Debt to GDP ratio at the end of 2014 was 47.7%. With the bond uptake now, we're expecting a reduction of another 1% in our debt to GDP ratio. So essentially, debt to GDP ratio is whatever percentage of our what the total volume of GDP is, what percentage of that, the nominal sum, is of the GDP. So that's when we talk about debt to GDP ratio. Our target is about 45% to achieve by 2017, 2018, and we should, God willing, achieve that.
Okay, and we will take another break. We will be right back. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to the show. Our guest tonight is the Finance Minister, Mr. Ayaz Sayed Qayyum. Minister, talking about debt and how we've been able to reduce, I believe, from somewhere around 52% previously to now, as you mentioned, 47%. It's been a gradual decline, and how exactly have we done this? Is it that we've been reducing our loan uptakes over the years, or have our repayments been better?
I think also, Edwin, it's a combination of things. The two main, obviously, our GDP has been growing. So it's like saying, for example, if your GDP is worth 10 and your debt is 5, that means debt to GDP ratio is 50%. If you have your GDP grow to 15 and your debt still stays at 5, it's 1/3, right? 33%. So obviously your debt to GDP ratio has declined because your GDP has grown. So our GDP has been growing. That's one factor. The other factor, of course, is that we have been also, the economy has been growing, but we have also been prudent about our finances. So we have, for example, been looking at various debts that other governments, previous governments have borrowed, that may have been borrowed at a very expensive rate. So we said, oh, okay, look, there's an expensive debt there. Maybe if the terms allow us, we can go in and pay that debt earlier by sourcing it from a cheaper debt source. So if previous government may have borrowed a particular amount of debt, say at 12%, and if we can get to pay that debt at 7%, we'll go and pay that off. So that debt now, the cost of it is at 7%. So you see, I mean, unfortunately, some people don't understand this, that even a 0.8% difference is a huge amount of money. So, the difference between 6% and say 6.857% is about $3 million in overall terms. So that's what we've also been doing, looking at, where the expensive debts, if we can refinance that and pay that off. In the same way, for example, it's $250 million US, we paid off $50 million, but got it now at a cheaper interest rate. So that also helps our debt to GDP ratio.
Let's go back to the economy as a whole, how we are seeing growth. Now, you mentioned earlier that there is a lot of disposable income out there, and that actually has been churning the economy for a number of years. But when you talk about this growth that Fiji is seeing and how the country is improving, how do we gauge how well this wealth is being distributed? Because there's always that saying that the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. Wealth distribution.
Look, there's a number of ways that we've addressed that issue, and I think it's an issue that, of course, many people can put a lot of emotional spin to it, but also at the same time, it is not necessarily phenomena restricted to Fiji. What government has done, what the opposition calls freebies, they're not actually freebies. We're actually saying we're giving people a leg up. So the fact that you're giving free medicine to those people below the age of, who earn less than $20,000, free water up to a particular volume for those households earning less than $30,000. You have free education. Now, these are the ways in which we are actually, in a way, redistributing the wealth. Because government is making money here, but we're using that money to then actually help people who need it. So that's, of course, one issue. The other way of helping the people at the bottom end of the scale is also to have minimum wages, which we have introduced. No other government has introduced that. We've introduced minimum wages. It's been reviewed now once already. We're looking at another review. Now that's for unskilled workers. But overall, the wage rates in many of the sectors has gone up. So that they're having another bite of the cherry as far as that is concerned also. So, and also then, of course, jobs are being created. When you have jobs being created, you have a lot more people who have a regular income coming into their lives. So that's what we've seen the growth do. We have also seen, for example, unlike some of the recent publications, the tourism spend. The tourism earnings now is about 1.2. I have the exact figures here with me. Is about 1.5 billion dollars this year. Mm-hmm. We expect to surpass that. Growth has been 8.4%. Now, the question has been raised about the retention of that money in Fiji. Some people are saying, well, the retention rate is only 40%. We would argue the retention rate is at least about 60%. And it's in fact increasing. As you may recall, about 4 years ago, government launched on this exercise. We were getting hotels and to grow more on the hotel sites, even growing lettuce, fruits, vegetables. And Ministry of Agriculture is very much focused on that. The Minister of Agriculture is talking about, getting the entire sort of value chain system in place. So you will see that more hotels now use more local fruits, using more local vegetables. In that way, of course, the wealth that has been gained from tourism flows down to these people who are actually supplying it to them too, this produce. So the distribution is there. I think there's one other point that I'd like to also point out to you that is very critical from government's perspective in terms of managing debt, is the mix of your debt. So if you say this is our entire debt portfolio, we like to maintain 70% of the source of the debt portfolio to be from local sources. 70% minus or plus 5. So the foreign debt is 30% minus plus 5. The reason why we do that is because when you borrow from foreign sources, you are subject to foreign exchange fluctuations. Mm-hmm. If you borrow in US dollars, if it appreciates, depreciates, etc. Whereas with local borrowing, it's obviously in the same currency as your own country. So that's the mix we've maintained, and that's being very prudent about it. This is why, for example, if we said let's get $500 million US from overseas, you may be able to gain a bigger portfolio in the market, but we then are obviously subject to foreign exchange rates.
But therein, you also have to face the criticism that in Fiji, one of the largest local financiers or investors for the government has been the FNPF. And people turn around and say that the government is using the FNPF as a piggy bank, as a personal piggy bank.
I think that really stems from people's being either quite obtuse or not knowing what they're talking about. If you look at most pension funds throughout the world, they obviously need a source of investment. Now, if FNPF, for example, did not buy short-term notes from government, etc., where would they invest that money to get that kind of return? I mean, if you look at the portfolio of how FNPF has lent money to even previous governments, most of the alliance government days, they all borrowed from FNPF. The interest rates went from 11, 12, 15%. So where else would they be able to invest that money and get that kind of return? Can they build a building? It'll take 3-4 years. Will they get a rate of return on renting the premises at about 12%, at 11%? You're very lucky to get an 8% rate of return on a building, if you rent it out. So you see, this is why, and I think the media needs to play a very critical role in it, and I think a lot of the journalists don't actually understand. So they say, this person has said this, and therefore it must be the truth. No, you have to go behind the scenes and look at, why? Why are they doing that? In the same way, for example, some people said, they're borrowing or lending money to Fiji Airways. Mm-hmm. Now, but the interest rate was phenomenal. Actually, they got paid very healthy rate of return the interest rates that Fiji Airways paid them. So it was a good investment for FNPF. But it was a doubly good investment for FNPF because what it did, it allowed Fiji Airways to actually buy 3 brand new aircrafts. What does that mean? It means it needs to hire more flight attendants. When it hires more flight attendants, it creates jobs. Guess what does that mean? It means that those people become FNPF members and contribute to FNPF. You see, if you look at most countries in the world, even Singapore, if you look at the history, their Provident Fund invested a lot in government, apart from government bonds, etc., and treasury notes and bills. They invested a lot in infrastructure because it was a good rate of return of investment for them, but it created jobs, it helped position Singapore a lot better, so a lot more people became employed and the fund became bigger. So you've got to take a long-term view. They're not knee-jerk reactions. I know some of the unionists have been saying that. This political talk, it's cheap political talk. They're not very good at managing or understanding finance, unfortunately. So you have to look at, well, if they lent it, yes, it would be problematic. If FNPF lent, government did not pay. If FNPF lent it 1%, that'd be a problem.
Okay, and it's time to take another break. That's the end of this segment. We'll be back shortly. Good evening and welcome back to the show. Minister, getting right into it, we've been talking about the economy and how it's been growing and there is more disposable income. What seems interesting to me is that inflation hasn't gone up. You would expect when you have this level of spending and this amount of money changing hands and in expenditure via investment, there would be an increase in inflation as well, relatively.
Yeah, you see, not necessarily. It depends on the policies you have in place. You see, some countries, for example, where they're purely focused on just reacting and giving large-scale wage and salary increments. That leads to inflation rate, of course, because that has a spillover effect on everything. If you're going to pay somebody, give them a $5 more pay rise, it'll have a spin-off effect. So in this case, what Fiji has been doing as far as government is concerned, like I mentioned, about free education, subsidized bus fares, about subsidized electricity, water, medicine, that obviously for the cost of living for an individual overall, it reduces the cost of living. Yes, of course, government pays for it. Government pays for it from the money it makes. But the fact is for the ordinary citizen, the cost of it comes down. This, of course, the low inflation rate has been helped by something completely out of our control, which has been positive, has been the low fuel prices. So when the price of fuel is obviously low, it has a huge impact in terms of the cost of running a business, your buses, your taxis, your generators for electricity. So it has a huge reduction in that. So the inflation rate has been low. Also, generally, the commodity prices over the world has not hiked up. So, if suddenly, for example, the price of wheat went up, this is completely out of our control. We don't grow wheat. And from wheat, we make flour. From flour, we make bread, we make roti, we make cakes, etc. So that would push up the cost. The price of wheat overall has not increased. The price of rice, for example, has not overall increased in the world market price. So that has been obviously a huge impact as far as positive, impact on inflation has been concerned. Of course, if tomorrow, for example, the price of wheat goes up, the price of rice goes up, the price of other commodities that we buy from other countries, oil goes up, it will have an impact on us.
Liquidity has been quite high for years now, and I remember there was a call made for local banks to be more open to lending to small businesses, to farmers, and not just mainstream big businesses. Liquidity still remains high, but do you think a lot of banks have taken up this proposal to open up their lending policies?
I think, liquidity is not as high as it was, say, about 2 years ago. There was a huge amount of money in the market available. It was not necessarily lent. You are right in the sense that government is concerned about, at times, the interest rates that banks offer to ordinary citizens. But currently, the interest rate has probably been one of the lowest ever in our history. The weighted average lending rate is about 5.8%, down from 8% at the end of 2006. So obviously there's a couple of factors at play. One is that because when you have a higher liquidity, the banks are more keen to lend, and in order to be able to attract people to borrow, they'll lend at a cheaper rate. On the other hand, of course, there's confidence in the market, and I think we have been over the years talking to the banks and telling them that they simply cannot just be focusing on just their own, commercial, parochial needs. They need to think overall as partners with government, as partners with Fiji and the Fijian people to move the country forward. So one of the areas that we'd like to focus and provide some initiatives and incentives is the lending rates for housing, because our huge focus for the next couple of years will be on housing. Housing is a critical area. You see, there are many Fijians who don't actually own a home, and our focus is for them to own homes. There are many people, for example, you may go and be served in a bank, and the person serving in the bank may be living on a squatter area on top of a mangrove swamp, somewhere around Suva. That's not the ideal situation. We want people to own homes, because when you own homes, it gives you an asset, it gives you a collateral. Because most people otherwise, when they don't have an asset, when they don't have a collateral, they end up going to money lenders, borrowing at high interest rates. And it becomes a vicious cycle. They can't get out of it. You have people who give the ATM cards to the money lenders as a form of security. So you see, that's one area we want to arrest. This is why you've seen government announcing previously about how we want to develop squatter areas. There's 4 squatter areas in the Suva-Nosori corridor that we're looking at, or Lami-Nosori corridor we're looking at developing. There are other areas, more housing projects coming along, and we want to have a more focused attention in order to get leapfrog. You can't just follow a linear pattern of development. We want more private sector participation. In countries, for example, like Malaysia, what the governments there have done in order to entice private sector to invest in that area, they've given them, say, a tract of land. So look, we'll give you this tract of land, you build houses at affordable prices, and then, we can get people, we may give them some form of grant, as we already do. We give them a form of grant so it helps them to buy a house. Once they own their own house, then they get into the mainstream of the financial system. We have also one other thing, important point that we've done is that I think about 18 months or 2 years ago, we changed the law where you can now have strata titles on e-tauke land and also crown land. Strata title basically means where, if you build a 4-story apartment, a 4-story building in which you have, say, 2 apartments on each floor, there's 8 apartments. You can actually buy the apartment. I'm putting it very simply. That becomes yours. You don't actually have to be on the ground.
Own the property.
Yeah, you don't have to be on the ground or own the entire property. You can just buy the flat. And that's how many countries have done it. You own the actual flat. So before, you could only have that on freehold land. What this does, it gives more opportunity for investors to put up that kind of structures and actually sell flats. It also increases the value of e-tauke land, because people previously would not say, lease e-tauke land to build strata title. Now they can, because there's the opportunity to do so.
Do you think people are still, despite all these policy changes, people are still shy when it comes to leasing out e-tauke land? Are they taking up more leases?
I think there's a lot more uptake of it, and I think with government always, talking very confidently about e-tauke land. I mean, I was horrified. We had when we had the Land Sales Act amendment, one of the leading lawyers in Suva say, everybody knows that e-tauke land is not secure. This is kind of whipping up people in a frenzy, which is not true. I mean, if you go to Denarau, all the hotels are built on e-tauke land. Most hotels in Fiji are built on e-tauke land, which banks actually use as collateral and lend those hoteliers money to build and invest. So e-tauke land and lease is secure. It's protected under the law. It's just a mindset that people need to change, because the moment they do that, we need to be positive about it. More landowners will benefit. They'll get a higher rate of return on lands probably they cannot lease at the moment, or people won't lease. And as you know, with government's initiative on helping e-tauke people develop their own land, I mean, 2 weeks ago I was in Yandua in Nanronga, where the landowners there have actually developed a site. They've already got the town and country planning approvals, and we are going to help them to develop the land, put in the roads, the water, electricity, so they're able to then lease out those lands and they'll get benefit from it.
Okay.
But it also helps with development.
And time to take another break. We'll be right back. Good evening. Welcome back to For the Record. We are still with the Finance Minister, Mr. Ayase Kayum, just about to wrap up for the evening. But before we go, tourism, the mainstay of our economy, has been the shining light so far as Fiji's potential and possibilities are concerned. it has continued to grow, but breaking more boundaries and reaching new benchmarks. I believe there have been some record visitor arrivals as well. How does that tie in with the entire picture of economic growth, the GDP, and also with foreign reserves?
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt tourism is a very critical part of our economy. It contributes about 33 to 35% towards our GDP. Growth rates, actually, compared to the same period last year up till August, this year has been 8.4%. So it's been, much bigger growth. We expect something like about $1.5 billion in terms of tourism earnings. I think what is also very critical to understand, and I know some people are obsessed with visitor arrival numbers. Yes, arrival numbers is one indicator, but also I think what is very critical is the yield. How much money are you making? As we've continuously argued for a number of years, you can have 2,000 people coming in and spending $1,000 each. Or you can have 1,000 people coming in and spending $7,000 each. What is better for the economy overall? Because I can tell you, if you have 2,000 people spending $1,000 each, and you have 2,000 people spending $10,000 each, all of them needs to, I'm being blunt about it, all of them needs to use the toilet, all of them needs to use water, all of them need to use the road. So you need to have the infrastructure always there. So in terms of the amount of money you're able to extract from them, obviously the higher the yield, the better it is, because you're able to get a better rate of return on your investment. Numbers, of course, is important too, but that has been growing. It's growing at a steady pace too. You also must realize that Fiji is a premium product. It is not some cheap line product. And we've tried to maintain the premium placing of Fiji as a product. Till today, if you mention the word Fiji to anybody outside Fiji, it conjures up very positive images of Fiji. That's what we need to maintain. We also need to be able to streamline processes. So the $105 million upgrade at Nandi Airport and the 4-lane that's coming out of the airport, it means that people will be able to be better processed through the airport. A person jumping on a plane at 6:30 a.m. in Sydney on a flight should be drinking his beer or pina colada in Denarau by midday. And that can only happen if you're good fast processing at the airport. They come out on the 4-lane road, they feel good about the place, they spend more money.
Finally, as we wrap up tonight, in the last budget announcement, there was mention of sale of certain government assets, Fiji Electricity Authority being one of them. As we move to the next budget, as we expect another announcement, what progress has been made in divesting these assets?
Quite a significant progress has been made on a number of them. As you know, FEA is a much larger entity to actually deal with in terms of divestment. Last year, I know we had made announcements on that, but none of the sales actually took place because we were hesitant to do it because the pricing was not good. You see, we are not divesting our shares in the sale of these assets. And mind you, we're not selling, the entire lot to somebody or a group of people or a group of companies. We are strategically getting partners. So the idea is we not just get the best pricing, but we get a good strategic partner. So you need, for example, somebody who's already been in the energy sector. You need somebody, for example, who's already been in the port sector, and they bring actually value, not just in terms of the dollars that they spend to buy the shares, but value to the company, value to the country. So there's a couple of them that we're looking at. FEA requires a longer lead time, and there is a lot of background work being done in the meantime, but there's some of the others are more closer to it being finalized, and we hope to make an announcement at least before the budget on one of them.
All right. Minister, thank you very much for being with us tonight. There was very fruitful discussions. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
And that was the show for tonight. I'll be back again next weekend. But up next is Nemani Ndalaima Tiki with his weekly column, his weekly segment. My say, I'll see you again next Sunday. If you have any comments or questions, email us fortherecord@fpc.com.fj. Good evening.
Good evening. I'm Nemani Ndalaima Tiki of the Fiji Sun. Welcome to Fiji's only TV editorial show. In my say this week, I will be talking about the choice that the opposition parties must make. The opposition parties must make a choice. Either it's politics of the past or politics of the future. If they read the writing on the wall, so to speak, in last year's general election, it was clear that the politics of the past will not win them elections. It is not a winning formula. So Delpa MP and lawyer Nico Nawekula keeps talking about 2006, but he conveniently leaves out 1987 and 2000. His selective references to the past mirrors his myopic view of the challenges facing all Fijians. His advocacy of the Fiji Native Tribal Congress policies is a feeble attempt to push for the return of the Great Council of Chiefs as part of the Itoke group rights. It is common knowledge that the Great Council of Chiefs was a creation of the British colonialists who used it to control the Itoke because of their traditional loyalty to their chiefs. After independence, it became a hotbed for politics for chiefs to launch and prop up their political ambitions. The council was a toothless tiger, and it did not achieve much for the Honorary Itoke. If you ask your Honorary Itoke to give an honest answer of whether they miss the GCC, the majority will say no. This is because even when the GCC existed, the Honorary Itoke did not see or receive any tangible evidence of direct benefits. It was perceived as a social club for the elites and their hangers-on, talking about many issues but achieving little. How many times did the GCC talk about the economic and education gap between the Itoke and Indo-Fijians? Many times. But papers from education experts were presented. The setting up of a scholarship unit to cater for the Itoke, while he did produce graduates, failed to realize its full potential, because in a way it encouraged mediocrity more than excellence. Besides, there hasn't been a proper audit to assess the success or failure rate. The Itoke cannot continue in this direction, because in the long term, it will manifest itself in the quality of service they deliver. Under the new system, the National Topper Scheme entails, based on equal opportunities, the Itoke are able to measure themselves against the national standards. In the long term, it will raise standards and produce quality graduates. This will in the long term mean quality and excellent service when they enter the job market, which will benefit the country. The Itoke must seize this opportunity, make the necessary adjustments, and go for it. The notion that the Itoke cannot compete and perform on a level playing field is a fallacy. It's an insult to those Itoke who have achieved and made a name for themselves in the academic and professional world. The Itoke must do away with the handout mentality, the mediocrity fostered by preferential treatment, low self-esteem, and defeatist attitude. They must start by creating the environment where the young people can be motivated to study and work hard in a cultural setting. It may require some profound changes to cultural practices in order to prioritize education. Again, it raises the question about hanging on to past practices which have become irrelevant to modern needs, or changing to capitalize on new opportunities. It is often said that a vibrant culture is one that continually evolves to keep abreast of modern changes. This is what Mr. Nawekula and his FNTC group need to be focusing on, instead of spending too much time and resources pursuing abstract ideas that do not mean much to the average Itoke, who now must face the current economic realities. A political ideology that seems to live in a foreign land and couched in complicated legal language does not mean much to the ordinary Itoke. What means to them is to be able to enjoy equal opportunities so that their children can enjoy the best education and health, stable employment or business, and become participants in a growing economy. That won't happen if we keep going back to the past and resurrecting the very issues that caused deep divisions in our communities. We should have learned from those painful experiences and now declare, never again. Let's leave the past in the past. Let's start on a new journey into the future of hope, peace, stability, unity, and prosperity. I am Neman Tiki, and that was my say this week. For more of my views, you can read the Fiji Sun. See you next week.